been sort of interested in how nations get along, and I read several books in the past about this. One of them being a book specifically by Niccolo Machiavelli. And so this book is a Penguin classic, and I actually have that particular copy of it. It's kind of yellowed just like that. Mine doesn't have 95 cents on it, but that tells you how old that book is. Paperbacks cost a little more than that now. This gentleman was a diplomat in the city-state of Florence in Italy. Lived in the late 1400s, early 1500s. And his idea was he wanted to make Florence great again. Florence, when he was young, growing up, was a very prosperous state under Lorenzo di, let's see if I get it right, di Medici. Medici. I think it's, well, we'll argue. We'll argue. But Medici. My Italian isn't so good. In any case, it was a book he wrote because he wanted to influence the politicians in the Florentine city-state to regain their prominence. At that time, France was invading, Spain was invading Italy. There were principalities, all these little city-states, Naples, Italy, was not really a country. It was a collection of principalities. And Florence was kind of on a downturn at that time. And so he wanted to see a resurgence of this. And he wrote this book, which he originally dedicated to Giovanni de Medici. And in the end, the actual published copy got dedicated to Lorenzo. But in any case, his idea was that if you're going to be a successful prince, if you inherit your territories, you have it pretty easy. You don't really have to do a lot to gain the trust of the people because you've got them already, because you inherited your state. But if you're a young prince, a new guy coming in, trying to take over, trying to establish yourself, and the Medicis were kicked out of Florence at the time, and so they had to come back in. He wanted to write down some of his observations because he worked as a diplomat, and he had been to see the Pope, he had been to see the King of Spain, he had been to France. He traveled around a bit, and he wanted to use all his knowledge to advise the princes. He was a minor nobility kind of guy, and he thought that the policy of the ends justify the means was a pretty good idea. If you don't do that, you are going to get crushed. And so there's a quote from the book. I underlined this when I read it years ago. It said, "Men must be pampered or crushed because they can get revenge for minor injuries, small injuries, but not for grievous ones." And that gives you some tone of what this book is about. And down through the centuries, many people read this and they considered him to have been in leagues with Satan, and all kinds of derogatory comments were made about him through the years because it's not a very kind sentiment, as you can sort of tell. However, in terms of realpolitik, which basically is how to survive in the real world, many people gained insights that helped them do that through reading this book. So how do we end up with the politics of might makes right? And that's essentially what Machiavelli was saying. And if you do a little research into this, this is not an old idea. In Plato's Republic, there's there's a lot of debates between Socrates and other people. And in one of them, the proposition is raised that justice is none other than the interest of the strongest party or the strongest ruler. And Socrates argued against this in a couple ways. One was that, just and good laws may not come from the strongest ruler, because even the strongest ruler will make laws that occasionally go against their best interest. And some rulers, if they want to be just and good, should consider the subjects rather than just their own power, and they should be focused on the people that they're serving. And there's a really good book also that I had read a while ago called The March of Folly by Barbara Tuchman. And she's a historical fiction writer, and she writes history by putting words in people's mouths that were alive at the time, telling the story as she imagined it would have occurred, but sticking to basically historical facts. And this book is kind of interesting because it's not about one particular time. It's about the fact that over and over again, governments have shown a tendency to pursue policies contrary to their own best interests. And it's a historical fact. You can look it up, and they're documented the subtitle is From Troy to Vietnam. The Trojan horse, the people that pulled that thing into the city, opened the gates and pulled it in, were pursuing a policy contrary to their best interests. Clearly, Vietnam, the United States in Vietnam, is the last story that she has in the book. There are several it goes through, but another case of where the United States probably could have done a better job of deciding what was right to do and what was not right to do. All right. So if you look at the overall picture of the world in terms of why realpolitik is necessary, you can draw some inferences from some historical philosophers, Thomas Hobbes being one. Hobbes wrote a book called Leviathan, and the subtitle is The Matter, Form, and Power of Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil. And that's the Old English spelling. And he describes in it a state of nature where without laws, without society, without civilization, we have basically the law of the jungle, right? There's no way you can have a happy life if all you have to do all the time is worry about whether somebody's going to eat you, some animal, or some person's going to come and kill you and take your stuff. And so he described this state of nature in Latin as summum malum, which means the absolute total amount of badness, right? And that's the state of nature humans find themselves in without a civilized kind of government. So what Hobbes decided, you needed a leviathan of government, a monster of government, somebody strong enough to tame the instincts of wild people or animals or whatever, to allow folks to live comfortably and live in a happy world. And to do this, you'd have to have a strong government of some kind that can control and make sure that bad people and bad things don't happen to you, because there's laws that will take care of that. This book was one of the first of a series, and I'm going to talk about two more in around the same time, 1600s, 1700s. But it was also could be taken as a justification for dictatorship, right? I mean, if you have this strong government that's controlling everything and everybody, you're trading your freedom, your abilities, your sovereignty, if you will, for security, but Hobbes didn't see any other way. So there are a couple other folks who investigated this topic and came up with somewhat different conclusions. John Locke, in 1755, published some essays, and in it he said that, well, the good thing, the way that you have a good society and a good government is to have a limited government that protects individuals, protects life, liberty, and property. Now that I have a little asterisk on the word property. It sounds very similar to our Constitution, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why is that? Because Thomas Jefferson, who was a tremendous fan of John Locke, was also an Epicurean. He liked Epicurus, the Greek philosopher who had said that pursuit of happiness is the ultimate good. Now that in his definition of the ultimate good, I'll digress because I happen to like Epicurus as well, is not hedonistic. Everything you do is just to feel good and damn the consequences. On the contrary, Epicurus said the pursuit of pleasure is measured. You have to, if you overindulge in things, it creates angst and pain and problems. So you have to be measured in what you do and so forth. And so Jefferson changed it a little bit when he wrote the Constitution, or the founding Declaration of Independence document of our country, to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, because he thought that covered property as well. So that's Locke. Rousseau, on the other hand, was a French writer at roughly the same time, and he wrote a book called The Social Contract. And Rousseau's idea was somewhat more collectivist, if you will. He was not for worrying only about, how the individual is protected. He wanted to have a society where the group was more important. In other words, it could be seen as more of a foundation of a somewhat communistic sort of philosophy, a collective philosophy where you basically make laws and are guided by what is good for the community rather than just the individual. So there's some shades of difference here. But with these kinds of social contracts, you could see that could be applied to nations as well. Should they just be for each country protecting their own rights, or should we all be looking to protect the global aspects of our ecology, the economy, et cetera? And I'm not saying one is good or bad. There's good and bad to both of them. So for a global perspective on what is right and good, we have Eleanor Roosevelt right there, and that's a Russian guy, named Koretsky. He was a university professor, and this was at the UN, but this was 1948, so the UN was meeting in Paris back then, not in the United States, and they decided, these folks, and Eleanor Roosevelt was head of this commission, because the United States had just won World War II, was pretty much the undisputed champion of the world in terms of everything. And Eleanor Roosevelt decided this is a good time to make some declarations about what we should be doing as a world to avoid the horrors of war, to avoid the kinds of conflagration that took place, culminating in the atom bomb being dropped on Japan. So this Declaration of Human Rights was published in December 10th, 1948. It was kind of a big deal at the time. And I have some bullet points. There's 30 different articles to this definition of what universal human rights should be. But they include things like life, liberty, security, the right to privacy, to have education, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom from slavery and torture, and freedoms for so everyone can enjoy economic, social, and cultural life in the way that they prefer. Now, there's a picture of the actual document. There's 30 total articles. I'm not sure if they're all on that page, but um, some folks have also said that, well, that's all well and good, but this is basically also a form of cultural imperialism. The United States and Europe were seen as the victors in World War II, the Allied side, and these were their values. Not everybody in the world shares the same values. Eastern culture, various cultures around the world in many places have different values than we have. And so this Universal Declaration of Human Rights is certainly inspiring, but it also was not enforceable in any way. There was no, a lot of people signed on to this, and a lot of constitutions and countries were written based on that document. But there's no actual teeth to it. So if people violate those principles, there's no recourse. Um, the emphasis was on, in a Lockean sort of way, individual rights rather than communities. And in many societies, collectivism was an important part of their social structure. And so there's not everybody's completely happy with this. So we still have wars and conflict, and that's a picture of General Patton there, and that's a quote from General Patton. And actually, that was in the movie. If you saw the movie Patton, you might remember that quote. He supposedly actually said that. I tried to find out if he really did or it was just something in the movie. But the point of this slide is when we think of what causes the problems in this world that we have that would make us question, do we live in a Machiavellian world? What are the causes of wars and conflicts? And there are several that people normally think of that just pop right to mind, like, well, I want your land. You're on land that I like, I want it. You don't have the right religion. I'm going to fix that. Right? Your ideology and identity are not mine. I'm going to fix that. Ambition and power. And then there's wars of independence. The United States fought a war of independence against Britain. So these are sort of the things that you traditionally think of. However, when you do a more scientific look at this, and this is work of a guy named Richard Lebeau, who was a French professor. I think he was at Dartmouth College too as well. He got around a bit. He looked at like 95 conflicts in history from the 1600s forward and tried to ascertain, in his best opinion, what was the cause of each war. And the number one thing is standing and status. I found that a little confusing as to what he was talking about. Self-esteem, honor, recognition, kind of like, the Soviet Union used to contain Ukraine. We want it back because that's our right to have that. And I think that's sort of what's driving that particular war over there. It's the honor of the Soviet Union that's being defended, the Russian people as a strong group that owned, ruled, and led a whole huge chunk of the world for quite a long time. So that is primarily the kind of thing that leads to most of the wars that occur. Security, um, you're being invaded, you're being attacked, you've got to fight back. But uh, human emotion and human beings being who they are and what they are, revenge, material interests, which, specifically, oh, I'd like to have some more property. So I'll just invade somebody, make up about 7% of the wars being started. And then various other reasons. Somebody blew up the wrong archduke or something, and then all hell breaks loose. So there's a book called Why Nations Fight that documents this much better than I can. And I'll confess I haven't read this book, but it's summarized quite well in several places on the web. And so this is my um, estimation of what it says. So So let's look at some current wars. The Russian-Ukraine war I mentioned, territorial ambition, and what the Germans called Lebensraum, living room. I want to have this space for my people and people like me and my country and my form of government. Um, because we are owed that. That's for us. The Israeli-Gaza conflicts is about territory and identity. It's a religious war, sort of, but it's also because one group of people and another group of people who have different languages, different cultural backgrounds, all want to be in the same place, and we're going to fix it one way or the other. Then you have Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Jihadist extremism and political instability are two main factors that are allowing those wars to occur. The countries don't really have strong, stable governments, and folks looking to perpetuate a particular religious standpoint are having a way to a way to try to take that country down and make it their vision of what it should be. And then Sudan is an ethnic conflict, basically. The two generals fighting each other in that used to be partners in the same army. And the government was weak, and they both decided they should take over. And so now they're fighting each other to see who wins. And so that is, my way or the highway. It's basically caused incredible starvation, death, destruction, because two guys' egos can't fit in the same room. So how do we get to this kind of a world where governments, even good governments, can break down, pursue policies contrary to their best interests, where these motives, these very human kind of motives, drive countries into wars, where the strongest usually are the ones who dictate the policy in the end, in a very Machiavellian sort of way. So people have said, well, we need some theories of social justice or global justice, if you will, to overcome these problems. And there are some, I guess, academics who put titles to some of these things. Cosmopolitanism is a theory of global justice where everyone's rights need to be respected, and it's kind of a Lockean sort of thing. We all have these basic rights, and without those rights being respected, everybody should do that. If we all did that, we would be fine. Statism and nationalism, they're kind of different things, but in a more collectivist sort of way versus a individualist sort of way. But it's about moral obligations that are principally within each state. And if every country does this and they they don't have a reason then to go out and invade and cause problems. And then the other theory of global justice is realism, which is kind of where we're back where we started with our Machiavellian world, that it's survival in anarchy. We're just going to have to deal with the kinds of problems that we've been seeing for the last, I don't know, thousands of years. So, if you have a theory of global justice, is that a good thing? And I read an interesting article by this professor in Singapore, Chandran Kokathis, and I probably mangled his name horribly if you know how to pronounce that better. His point was the pursuit of justice in the international order is dangerous. Okay. Um, so we're challenging you here. This is a challenge to you to tell me, is this right or is this wrong? But his argument is that it requires the establishment of some powerful supernatural over above nation control to make justice happen in the world. And he goes on to say that this would legitimize the power by some supranational group or collective of states to mandate justice. But, he says, we are not capable, we as humans are not capable of devising institutions that can honor the distinction between good and evil. Now, is that true? Can we do that? If we can, why haven't we? We've been around a long time. So, and you know, I've seen changes in my short lifetime that clearly tell me that global justice doesn't exist now. And I think you probably would all agree. But who would enforce global justice? You know, you had the Pax Romana when the Roman Empire was around, and that lasted for 400 or 500 years or so. We had the Pax Americana, if you will, that lasted for maybe 50. I don't know. Maybe it's still lasting, but who's going to enforce the rules? The strongest? And if the strongest turns out to be somebody else in the future, because we may or may not be 50, 100 years from now, who knows? I think he might have some kind of grain of truth in this, that we have to be very careful what we ask for, because we may not always be the persons enforcing the rules. So I'm going to end the talk on kind of an upbeat note. And this is a video by this guy, Travis Reeder, who is at Johns Hopkins University. And he did a video interview with the communications director of the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. And it was titled Living in a Moral Life in a Catastrophic World. And so what basically, I think the Carnegie Institute folks and what he was saying was that we can't always get you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, now, you might get what you need. I don't know. But if individuals around the world start practicing some basic, common sense kind of things, we can make progress. And so he goes through this and lists some of these. And he talks about where we are now. How did we get here? And you look at what's going on in the United States today. He talks about teams. We have teams in this country. There's the MAGA team. There's the liberal team. There's different teams. And Um, and teams have a party line. Okay. And so if you're a team member and you all may be a member of a particular team of some kind, um, you have these rules, thou shalt not. No thinking is needed. All you have to do is know what the teams stand for, and then you can argue with somebody, you can express your opinions, and they're the team, you're with the team, and then we're fellows, we're good. Um, the point is thinking is not needed. And he objects to that. Um, he talked a little bit in terms of international policy about Truman and the Korean War. Um, when Truman was president and the Korean War was on, uh, things weren't always going our way. In fact, when the Chinese entered the war, we were losing, and we were losing quite badly. The U.S. forces had pushed all the way to the Chosun Reservoir in North Korea, which is on the border with China. They had taken over the whole country. And then the Chinese entered the war and came to the support of Kim Il-sung, who was the Korean uh, leader. And at the time, he was actually, before that, a resistance fighter against the Japanese. And he was pissed off with the Americans because when they came into Korea, they put a lot of collaborators, Korean collaborators with Japan, in charge of things. And this was a policy the US had in Germany. They used a lot of ex-Nazis to be mayors and people because they could administer, and we needed administrators. Well, Kim Il-sung was a resistance fighter, and he hated the Japanese, and he saw the Americans doing this, and he said, "Well, who will support me?" And so he went and found the Russians and the Chinese because they were the only other people, and they were quite nearby. And he converted to full-on communist dictator because that's where his bread was buttered. He could see that he could do some good with that for him. Um, Truman could have used the bomb, could have changed it, totally changed the outcome of that war. He decided not to. Now, there's a lot of good reasons why, not just because he didn't want to see a lot of dead children, which is what he said at that point, as to why he wasn't using it, but also the fact that the Russians already had a bomb and were potentially, it would start a global war again with China and Russia, and we were pretty tired of global war at that point. But he could have used the bomb and ended that war, bang, like that. It would have just stopped the war. The US would have won. There would be no North Korea. And he didn't. He made that choice for all those reasons, I think. But it was considered a moral choice by a lot of people. Now, speaking of choices, Dr. Reeder also says that choices don't need to be binary, and that's what we have a lot today. You have your MAGA tribe and your liberal tribe, and you're either one or the other, and you follow their rules, and that's what you do. But what that leaves out is all the gray area, and the gray area is where the meat is. That's what's important, and that's what we're not paying attention to. And that's why thinking not needed is a big problem, because you have to use your brain and figure out what's right and what's wrong. And so a lot of people fall into nihilism. They say, well, I can't affect things, so I'm not going to, I'm not going to stop global warming. So I'm just going to get a big pickup truck because I like big trucks, and I'm going to drive around and terrorize everybody else on the road because it makes me feel good. We almost got run over by a truck today driving here. So, just a big one of these monster pickups. So, so should I go out and get a big pickup truck too and bang around on the highway with these guys? No, it's not the way to go. It's not binary. It's not one thing or the other. It's, well, if I get a smaller car with really good gas mileage, or I get an electric car, I may not solve global warming, but I can make a little bit of a difference. And this is kind of what his point is, that that's what we need to do. He also commented on young people. Young people today, he said, and when you think about it, it's absolutely true, have seen crisis after crisis. The economic downturn in the late 2000s, the onset of COVID. I mean, it's just been one thing after another. Trumpism, okay? I mean, it's just one thing after another. And these people are looking around, and these are young people. They've not known anything else. So a lot of them give up agency, as they say. And what Dr. Reeder is telling us is it is a moral failure to give up agency. You need to be doing what you can do. And while you may not eventually solve all the problems, this is how we get out of the Machiavellian world. This is how we get to where we want to be, because in the end, governments are made up of people. And if we all behave a certain way, presumably sooner or later, our government will too. Okay. And then finally, he says, create space in your life for thinking. Take some time to sit and ponder or write down your ideas or collect your thoughts about a particular topic and engage with it a bit. People don't do that very much. I'm too busy. I gotta go make the donuts, right? Get up early, time to make the donuts. And so you get so distracted by everyday life that you forget to take some time to sit down and think about these things that matter to people and to the world. And so that's it. I will end the talk there.
Thank you, Fred. I just took a glance at my watch and I thought, oh my God, we're really running out of time. But no, I didn't change my watch. You know, Apple changed my phone, so that was very helpful, but I didn't change my watch. So we're going to have Q&A, and basically the guidelines for Q&A are raise your hand, and whoever's passing the mic will make a mental note of who was first, blah, blah, blah. We prefer that you not ask more than one question at a time or make more than one comment at a time. Also, we'd like everyone to have a chance to ask a question before we go back to people. I'm not ready for that yet. Also, we're passing the baskets because we're an all voluntary organization. And so we do collect small donations during our meetings to help us run things. Who's passing the mic? Should I pass? You're going to pass the mic? Okay. So I did see you first, Amy. And then I saw Judith. I see. Okay. Amy first.
I have a comment on the young man, Rader, who said the young people have gone from crisis to crisis. And I was born in 1948 and so the crisis then was the Korean War and MacArthur's business with the president. And then there was the Bay of Pigs and the Kennedy assassination, and then Nixon, and then. So the only thing that's really changed is the constant news cycle. We were able to tune out some of that because we only had news at 5 or 6 o'clock at night with somebody on the TV or radio. So we had plenty of crises since the 30s. We just didn't hear them all.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that social media has changed the entire scope of the world for everybody. And if you are constantly bombarded with the current crisis of the day, it could probably wear on you in a different way than it did for us. I mean, I was in college in the 70s. I remember spending a lot of time partying and not really thinking about things. The Vietnam War was over. There wasn't even a draft. Everything was fun. But, you know, economic downturns occurred in the 80s. And so there were things, but it wasn't in your face all the time. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation, and I really liked the last discussion you had with the fellow about whether or not things are moral. I think one reason that so many people are changing to
Everybody's,
is the emergence.
Todd, they're after you again. Oh.
It's just.
Yeah.
Okay, the emergency's over. And now I was going to say, I think that's why so many people are changing their political, yeah, to independent or unaffiliated, because so many people are not willing to go, you know, it's binary with the two tribes of GOP and Democrat, because it's not working. And I think that's one reason we're seeing so much of that, because the gray area, the thinking area, more and more people are inhabiting, and that makes me feel somewhat hopeful. I think that's good. And I wanted to say, and I just forwarded to everybody on our listserv, an article from The Guardian about what just, you know, the election that just happened in the Netherlands, and discussing the fellow who won didn't really feel like he was with any particular party, but he was a progressive person. And the whole discussion I thought was really important, and it was great that he was elected because it had to do more with a moral basis. But the issue is, for me, was no labels. I mean, progressive became a label instead of a good thing. If we're not progressing, we're stagnating, you know? And this whole way of thinking that he demonstrates and represents is getting rid of that label, and we're making progress toward what we really need to become. And I'm excited about that. If there's any reason to feel any positivity these days, you know, that's hopeful. And I agree with the last fellow's, the conversation in his presentation. And so thank you very much for that. But I did want to point out there might be some hope around this place. Thank you.
Yeah, it's that video, it's an hour-long video. It's freely available on the web, and the link I think was on the slide, but I'm happy to send it to you if you want. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah. So this morning when I was rushing to get out of the house, I remembered from a political science course many years ago in college, dealing with Machiavellian. And I remember he made this rather startling moral statement where he sort of qualifies all these things he says in his doctrine. And I went on Wikipedia trying to find that comment, which I know exists. And then instead, when I'm perusing Wikipedia, I see this comment that something called republicanism came out of that period of time and his thinking. Of course, right now, republicanism and Machiavellianism go hand in hand, but that wasn't the point of this. This was a different kind of republicanism, which was used by the founders of our country when they set up the Declaration of Independence. So I'm a little lost on that. How could they use Machiavelli's thinking to set up our Constitution, which seems to be completely different than his thinking?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully can answer your question because it's been a while since I read that book. But what I will tell you is he was very much interested in whatever works. And he spends pages and pages discussing whether it's better to be feared or loved. In the end, he settles on feared because it's easier to control the population that way. Um, uh, he was not really for or against any particular system of government. What he wanted was to allow successful control. He believed in one person ruler, one ruler at the top, a king or a prince who would basically direct the progress of the state. And so in terms of how that fits with republicanism, I don't recall, and I'd have to go back and look at it. But he was ruthless. He didn't care if you had to hurt people or what you had to do. Success was the important thing. The ends justify the means was basically his philosophy. And he analyzed it very methodically to try to figure out the best way to get to his goal, which was a strong state.
Well, I would like to disagree with your second to last speaker, the guy from Singapore, that I think the Pax Americana was very successful. I think it did impose a kind of justice in the world, and it's a simple justice of just following basic rules between countries. It's maybe not establishing justice in this sense on an individual level. There's nobody starving. Everybody gets a fair judiciary. But I mean, in terms of the relations between nations, for the most part, there were no wars. There were few wars, fewer than historically. And that really worked. Now, there was a guy, Phillips O'Brien, just wrote a book about who wins wars. And his point is that a collaboration, that having good relations with other countries is the most important thing. And what Trump is doing now is actually weakening the country. That the Germans lost because they didn't, in the First World War, they didn't have enough allies, that the West had allies, that actually it's in the interest of a country then to have allies worldwide, to get along with other countries, to have a set of rules that the countries follow. And okay, I guess an exception is if a country feels it's in its interest to create an empire and dominate other countries, this doesn't work. But if your interest is sort of like the United States was, and a lot of other countries, is encourage commerce, try to encourage your, build up your standard of living, and encourage trade, and that the way that we can have we could have a world system that's fair and does impose justice between states. And I don't see the danger of some strong states dominating others if the world system is basically enforcing rules between countries.
Yeah, well, I mean, somewhat disagree with that, and I somewhat agree. I don't fully agree with this gentleman, but I can see if the United States, as we go forward in the future, continues along the course that we're currently on with the kind of president we have, with the kind of plus, we're not going to be the dominant force in the world that we were. In terms of who wins wars, manufacturing base is a really important thing. China's got it in spades. They got way more manufacturing base than the United States has. And after you go through the first round of throwing bombs at people, et cetera, it's how many planes can you build? How many tanks can you build? How many, how quickly can you make all that happen? We're going to lose round two. We'll win round one, but we're going to lose round two. And so you have to consider if our consideration of what is good and right differs from, say, the Chinese version of what's good and right, we're going to be saluting them and following their rules. So in that sense, I support this idea that it doesn't come from above, it comes from below. Okay. The Tao Te Ching says in one of the verses, I forget which, that when you need rules for social justice, and this I'm paraphrasing, it's a sure sign that justice is absent. Okay, so if you're going to need rules, if you're going to have somebody who's going to enforce the rules, you need those rules. That's a problem in the sense that if it was the people, as the last slide sort of shows, that were acting according to these principles, maintaining agency, maintaining their ability to affect change and affecting change in a positive way, you're much better off. That's my opinion.
Goodness, so many things to discuss, so many things that can be gone over in this thought-provoking presentation. Thanks, Fred. I've been sitting here thoroughly engaged for the entire portion of it, and it's made it kind of difficult to focus on what I would want to say because I've heard any of a number of things that require response. Overall, one of the things in dealing with the crisis after crisis, it reminds me at this point in my life, although I'm no less idealistic, I've become more pragmatic, that a lot of the discussions tend to come from a white perspective. Whatever may be going on in social media, and I don't disagree that for some young, the ability to get all of this information over and over again has an effect. Well, as an African-American, crisis has been rather consistent over time. And consequently, a question becomes, how does the young crisis after crisis philosophy actually apply as a reality when there is a group that has consistently met with these crises at a fairly consistent level throughout the country's history? The other aspect I began to think about here was that as you went through the discussion on the various philosophies, Machiavellian, Lockean, so forth, it occurred to me that America has been the absolute petri dish for almost all of them throughout its entire history. You can actually find these different philosophies applied throughout the entirety of American history, and thus you can actually derive a lot of information as to the practicality and the result of how each one of these philosophies do have an effect, and which one indeed may be more applicable as far as human beings go. Another aspect is the cause of war, which almost never, in a way, seems to be discussed, is that what I have seen as a very basis of war in everything that was described up there actually involves human ego. Whether you're talking about territory or emotions or religion, identity, all of those things at their very foundation have to do with human ego. And it seems to me, if you don't get down to that nitty gritty, then you're just kind of dealing with the symptoms over and over and over again. And can we deal with human ego in such a way? That I can't answer. I always follow the golden rule. Ask yourself the question, do you want it to happen to you? No, don't do it to anyone else. And lastly, I do have one question. The Machiavellian philosophy, in my mind, I started to think of things. How do you feel it compares with or runs in conjunction with Ayn Randian philosophy?
I'm sorry, with which?
Ayn Randian philosophy.
Oh, Ayn Randian. I'm not as well versed in Ayn Randian philosophy as I probably could be. Maybe give me a brief summary of what you see as Ayn Randian philosophy.
It tended, excuse me, I don't know a whole lot, but it tended to deal with, in a way, an Iron John kind of philosophy of males in singular pursuit of their desires and needs as a positive aspect of accomplishment.
Right.
Also, the notion is that, yeah, that the pursuit of self tended to be the primary goal.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
Or libertarian point of view too.
right. Yeah. So it's sort of a, a basis for capitalism, if you will. You can't have capitalism without self-interest. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Self-interest among nations and can go to the extremes of a Machiavellian type of situation. So I would see that as an extreme of this Ayn Randian idea. It's very easy to end up at that extreme when you start going down that path. And, you look at the robber barons in the United States back in the, early 1900s, those folks, the Carnegies, Rockefellers, those people, that was very Ayn Randian from what you're saying, right? Effectively, that's an extreme when you have these enormous disparities in wealth, where you have this huge concentration of everything for me, forget everybody else. So yeah, I think Machiavelli would not necessarily appreciate that point of view simply because he wants the state to survive and last, and that doesn't work in the long run. His goal was to, what can we do to build, maintain, and keep a strong state? And we have to lie, cheat, steal, murder, mayhem. That's what we're going to do, but we're going to maintain that strong state. So they're kind of different things, I think. Yeah.
Well, I got a lot out of this. This was fascinating. It was a very good presentation. The one thing that made me a little concerned was the guy who was talking about the causes of war. And I wondered what was his research method. I know he hadn't read the book, but I would like to understand, because to me, those were causes that maybe the dictator or the president of these countries might have had. But in our history, we're not often told the real causes. So I don't know if that's accurate. This is something that the governments were trying to tell people, this is why we did it. But I can't imagine, the real cause is probably pretty, hidden in a lot of them. That's the comment.
Yeah, this was an academic study, and it's the reference is here at the bottom. And this guy, Ned Lebeau, is a fairly well-respected academician. I think he worked in England for a while, possibly at Cambridge, and I'd have to go back and look. And then in the US at a couple different prestigious universities. And so I am not particularly well-versed in the exact methodology he used. I know he surveyed more than 90 different wars from 1600 on. And what he was looking for was how he could identify not what the rulers said is the cause of the war, but what social scientists, political scientists, military historians have come to agree was the actual cause of these wars, and categorized them this way. And I have not read, I'll confess, I have not read that study. I had planned to do that before this thing, but we were out of our house and I got busy. But I have that's your homework. I have a plan to look at that actual paper, and if I get a hold of it, I'd be happy to send you a photocopy. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, well, so I mean, this was 90 some odd conflicts between 1600 and something to 2010 to up to that time. And so it's not comprehensive through today, but it gives you some idea as to what's typically causing it. And Solomon hit the nail on the head, is ego. Right? That's it.
So I have a quick comment and then a question. The comment is probably 25, 26 years ago, my book group, my first book group chose Atlas Shrugged to read. And that's one of Ayn Rand's books.
And Ayn Rand.
And I mean, it's like 1,000 pages, so it was kind of ridiculous, but boy, it was a learning, because to me, that book sort of encapsulated the whole Republican line, that there are takers, there are producers, and then there are takers,
Yeah,
and
the
there.
makers, the takers, and the fakers, right?
Yeah, and this whole thing of all these tech billionaires, that somehow. So I would recommend that book for anybody who has the stamina to stick with it. I thought it was quite good, quite interesting.
So probably a movie version.
There is a movie version, actually, and it was produced by conservatives. I stumbled across that a few years ago, a new movie version, recent movie version. But anyway, my question is, can somebody clarify for me what the Pax Americana, what's the years of the Pax Americana?
Well, I would say after World War II, there was basically no other power on earth that could withstand the force of the United States military. Up until today. Because really, our military right now is the largest in the world by far. The Navy is enormous. The Air Force, the submarines, the missiles. Now, the Russians have rough parity and maybe even more nuclear missiles, but in terms of actual combat ability, at least in the first phase of any kind of conflict, the United States military is considered by pretty much everybody fairly superior. In terms of the success that we will have with that tremendous force, and look what happened in Vietnam. So and again, it points out, I think, the final conclusion, again, that it's bottom up, not top down. And so, yeah, we should probably wrap it up because we're about out.
Trump has rejected it. He's withdrawn from alliances. So there's really nobody enforcing the Pax now,
Yeah.
except maybe NATO.
I have two comments. One, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if the US is not the dominant force. We're not that great. Our intentions in many cases, maybe most, have not been very moral or ethical. Invading other countries, it's all about oil and stuff, so I don't mind if we're not the dominant force. And doesn't it make you sad that the value of a country is measured on its military force? That sucks. you know? And what I was going to say also is, I mean, in a way, it seems pretty simple to me, even though, of course, it's very complicated, but we simply do not need somebody who controls or is in charge or monitors everyone. If we had equity in the world, you know, nobody would be trying to get some resources, or no starving person would steal groceries from the grocery store. For God's sake, I'd do it if my family needed, food. And it's just simply because there's so much inequity. We wouldn't need controls and military and people to be in charge, and we wouldn't, so we need to get back to the basic problem solving, and that's the inequity and respect for everyone and their own cultures across the whole world. That's the hard part. And I don't think it's that hard, because it makes sense if we could bottom up, like we're doing now with the protests and so on, say this isn't who we want to be, and we're not going to be this way anymore.
Yeah, well, the biggest danger is falling into apathy, right? Because as you correctly point out, there's big problems out there. And so that nihilistic idea of, well, I can't fix it, so screw it. I'll just do what it's their problem. That's another thing. These young people today, they say, well, it's the corporations that screwed up the world, that polluted the global ecosystem. Let them fix it. Right? That's apathy. That's I'm giving up because it's not my job. That's absolutely part of the problem as well. And so you need to have this idea that it's not all or nothing. It's not binary choices. It's what can I do to make things better?
Yeah, the last point that Tharsis made about not institutions not being able to make a distinction between good and evil, that's wrong, because we have a UN rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, who lays down exactly the difference between good and evil in Gaza. The UN is an institution that comes out on many conflicts about ending war crimes, etc. So there's no problem distinguishing between good and evil. The problem is enforcement. And when you have a UN that's stacked with 5 countries that have veto power, like the United States, who vetoes every action against Palestine and stops it, the problem is not distinguishing between good and evil. The problem is enforcement. And if the international community, recognizing the genocide in Gaza by the ICCJ, had acted as a group with economic enforcement by cutting off trade with Israel, this conflict would have been over 2 years ago. They haven't done it. And of course, they're complicit in that genocide. So the real issue is not distinction, it's enforcement.
Yeah, and I would just finally say, and I think we probably need to move on, that I think he was using that more in a metaphorical sort of way. I mean, we all know, we all can see when children are being bombed, right? That picture of Ukraine showing the kid on the swing set, and in the background is the bombed out building. We all know that that's bad. But in terms of where society needs to go and how do we get there, having a overarching organization, it might be difficult to maintain the focus on what we consider good. I think that's kind of the point he was after, but I'll end there and we can talk about it some more.
Fred, that was great. Very enjoyable discussion. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to speed things up a little bit so that we have time for refreshments. Announcements is next. Do we have announcements from the floor?
I just have one. I put some flyers over there for the Chatham Artist Guild Tour. If anybody's interested, you could take the brochures, and that's just the first 2 weekends in December. So there's plenty of time to plan where you want to go.
Very good holiday shopping. Next Sunday's meeting is online. Do not come here. Do not come to these doors. You will be lonely and locked out. But we'd be happy to have you join us online.
Next Sunday, we're having a board meeting after the meeting. It's online. It's on the same channel, same bat time, same bat channel as the meeting itself. All you have to do is stay on and you can see the inner workings of how the sausage is made, how we make EHST go. And everybody's invited, yeah, visitors, guests, we don't care. Yeah.
I'm taking the mic away.
Okay. No happy hour this week, but there will be a Chapel Hill happy hour next Wednesday, 6 to 8. Not sure on the location yet, but that will be in your newsletter, not for this week, but for next week. I want to thank the volunteers for today. Fred, thank you very much for putting the effort into doing this presentation. It was really interesting, so thank you for that. I thank Solomon for opening and closing words, and we'll go to closing words in just a second. Mary for being our greeter, Amy for doing our refreshments. Oh, there is food. And thank you. Thank you also for the folks who brought food for Cora, because it's a tough time for people who need food. So, and thank you, Stevie, for bringing that to Cora.
And thanks, Todd, for being Zoom maestro.
And yes, Zoom for being, yeah, Todd, not Zoom for being Todd Maestro. Todd for being Zoom Maestro. And Solomon, closing words.
Okay, gonna make this quick so everybody can go snack. I had something on ice cream, but decided it felt kind of inappropriate given the subject matter and how serious it was. Thank you, Fred. Very thought-provoking. And so, as is usual, shooting from the gut, I did try to look up the African-American Machiavelli. And interestingly enough, what I discovered is that you can't find anyone. You can find in fiction, there's a comic book character in Black Panther who exemplifies those examples, but not a living African American, just sort of aspects that you can. Perhaps the preachers in churches come as close as possible. So the only thing I wanted to do is leaving as part of the thought and with this talk is to a certain degree, the idea of what occurred to me was we can point to sort of Machiavellian and dictators in this country with only one group, even though that Machiavellianism is not race-based, there's only one group in this country that is able to express all aspects of that philosophy. The rest of us actually don't have the power to affect our culture and society to that level, and exactly what that kind of means in when we're dealing with this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Solomon. So meeting's over. Please join us for coffee and refreshments. And wash your hands. Fred is a microbiologist.